study session of Independent School District 535 School Board is called to order at 5:30 p.m. Monday, March 22nd, virtually in room 137 of the Edison Building, with colleagues participating electronically in accordance with Minnesota Statute 13D.021 until further notice. Members of the public are currently not permitted to attend these meetings physically due to COVID-19 pandemic recommendations. Interested members of the public are welcome and encouraged to view this meeting at youtube.com/ISD535, where the live stream video may be found. The school board acknowledges that RPS sites are situated on ancestral lands of the Dakota people, and we honor the Dakota nations and the sacred land of all Indigenous peoples. Present at the school board at this meeting are school board members. Ms. Amundson, will you please call the roll?
Clerk Amundson, here. Director Barlow.
Here.
Director Garcia.
Here.
Director McLaughlin.
Here.
Chair Marvin.
Here.
Vice Chair Nathan.
Here.
Treasurer Workman.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Amundson. Stellar job there. 2.01, approval of the agenda. I have one change to the agenda. We'd like to change item 7.01, approval of Minnesota School Board Association Interim Superintendent Community Survey Tool, to add and timeline.
Move approval.
Second, Amundson.
It's been moved and seconded. Ms. Amundson, will you do a roll call vote, please?
I will. Director Amundson, aye. Director Barlow.
Aye.
Director Garcia.
Aye.
Director McLaughlin.
Aye.
Director Marvin.
Oops, aye.
Director Nathan.
Aye.
Director Workman.
Aye.
Thank you. 7.01, approval of Minnesota School Board Association Interim Superintendent Community Survey Tool and timeline. This evening, we are really fortunate to have with us Ms. Barb Dorn, who is the Minnesota School Board Association representative we will be working with on our interim search for a superintendent. We have two things we really want to get through this evening, so this meeting is going to be tight and focused and on task. Right, team? Good. First one is the survey that we will be sending out to our community members. And Ms. Dorn, I will turn this over to you and lead us through.
Great. Thank you, Chair Marvin. I appreciate it. Well, first of all, I have not had the opportunity to meet all of you, but I want to offer you our sincerest thanks from the Minnesota School Boards Association for entrusting us with assisting you for the interim superintendent search. We are very much looking forward to working with you on the search and a successful conclusion here in the next few months. So thank you first and foremost. I really, truly appreciate it on behalf of all of us here at MSBA. Also, would you be willing to just take one moment to introduce yourselves for me, if you would share your name and how long you've each served on the school board for Rochester Public Schools? That would be wonderful. Thank you.
And
Alphabetic.
yeah, we know the drill, so let's just go alphabetically. Thanks.
I'm Melissa Amundson. I'm in my third year.
Don Barlow, I'm into my 5th year.
Jessica Garcia, my 3rd month.
Welcome.
Karen McLaughlin, also 3rd month.
Oh, also welcome.
3.5, I guess, Jess.
It just seems like longer. Jean Marvin, 7th year.
Kathy Nathan, 3rd year.
Julie Workman, 11th year.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the fact that you have a real breadth and depth of experience on the board, along with some new ideas and fresh perspectives. So it's great to have a cross section of those different years of experience on the school board. So again, really looking forward to working with you. We're going to dive right in and talk about the Superintendent Stakeholder Survey for your interim search. All of you should have a copy of that, is correct? Great, thank you so much. I'd like to make this relatively informal, so if you have questions as we go through the stakeholder survey, just stop me, interrupt me. I want to make sure that this survey reflects the intentions of the school board in getting feedback from your stakeholders for the interim search. The opening paragraph is real clear that this is for someone to assist and lead the school district during the 21-22 school year, and it is for a one-year appointment. So this sort of survey would look a little bit differently if you were looking for the long-term superintendent, but we wanted to create something that truly reflected the interim needs of a district and a district of the size you have in Rochester. The date is highlighted because we don't know what that will be yet and how long the survey will be open. That ties directly into the timeline, which we'll also be discussing this evening. One of the things we always like to do with this survey is have people self-select what hat they're wearing when they respond to the survey. Every district is different. I will tell you that most of the responses tend to come from staff and parents, and yet oftentimes we're surprised by a special interest group in the community that really rallies and gets folks to fill out the survey as well, but that is something that they self-select. Typically, we don't sort of slice and dice the results in a condensed search such as this. If we had the luxury of time to maybe take 4 or 5 months for a search, we would probably pull a lot of responses by category of respondent. I think with the timeline you're looking at, though, to be most efficient, we would probably provide all of these results in the aggregate, unless for some reason it's very important to the board to separate those out by category. Also, other stakeholder groups you'd like to call out. We have 6 here currently. Is there a 7th or 8th that you would like us to add as far as when folks select what hat they're wearing when they respond?
We had a cabinet member who asked why business owner was the one, why that category was there. The other ones, make sense, but what was the reason for including that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Very often with school districts, and again, every community is different, the business community, whether it's through a Chamber of Commerce or Convention and Visitors Bureau or something like that, is a relatively large and influential stakeholder group. That's not necessarily saying that it has to be included, however, and that those folks could just as easily select community member or other. So if you want us to pull that one out, that's potentially an option for you as well.
Well, and then I know others have some things to say too. I guess that's the question. This is not a business meeting, so my understanding is we won't be voting on this, but should we just sort of come to consensus as we go through, or?
That would be really helpful. One of the things that we're most excited about in speaking with the interview committee a few weeks ago is getting this survey translated into multiple languages for your stakeholders. Knowing that that's going to take some time, I'd really like to leave the meeting this evening with edits to this so that we're able to start the ball rolling on getting these translated, and then we need to get them back and get them copy and pasted into our survey tool. So in the interest of time, if we could reach consensus around sort of what you want changed on the survey, that would be very, very helpful.
Thank you. Director.
Is my mic on?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm fine with leaving it out. I think people can identify under the other. My concern is that there is a wide range of businesses from, a business that employs 1 million people versus a business that employs 3 employees. So I'm not sure if we did disaggregate that data, if we would really get an accurate picture of the business community because it's so broad. And I would hate to put in smaller or different designations of what kind of business owner. I think that would be going too far at least for an interim.
Are there any objections to leaving that one out? I'm seeing none. Okay, cross out business.
So that leaves us with 5 stakeholder groups. Is that appropriate, or are there others you want to discuss?
Kathy,
Well, I'm curious.
Oh, go ahead, Don.
I'm curious. In other surveys, and I didn't take the time to actually take a look backwards, but are these consistent with the identifiers that we normally tag to our survey, community surveys? Certainly parent, student, staff, community member. Have we, and I know we kind of moved on from business owner, but have we included business owner in the past? I'm just curious. If no one recalls, that's fine. I was just kind of curious, but that's all I had.
Okay, just my recollection, and this isn't scientific. I think that I know we didn't have business owner, but I think the other ones are pretty typical of the categories that we include. Ms. Nathan.
We also had a staff member ask if we could consider adding caregiver to parent and making it parent caregiver, because that's sort of the standard terminology we've been using in our other communications.
So does that work for people? Parent / caregiver. Good. Okay. Thumbs up there. Good. Oh, Ms. McLaughlin.
Would there be any thought to including the concept of partnerships that we have in the community? And I was originally thinking like community partner, but I thought that might be confusing, but perhaps like district partner. It just seems to me like we're ramping up a lot of things for summer programming and reaching out to community groups that we'll be partnering with, that I think it would be valuable to consider their input, potentially as a different category.
Well, and I wonder, I think as Barb said, that when we do the long-term superintendent search, that could be really valuable. But since this, I think, won't be disaggregated much, it may not be as valuable for this one. It's absolutely something to keep in mind, though, Karen, going forward. So I think we're good with the title and roles.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's a great discussion. Next, we have a list of areas of expertise that the stakeholders have an opportunity to select for the interim superintendent. We recommend choosing 5 per person. We'll get to choose 5. That's 1/3 of the total. There's 15 areas of expertise there. And we found, generally speaking, that asking folks to winnow it down to about 1/3 of those choices gives them enough room to prioritize the things they feel most strongly about. And it does involve some tough choices, because it goes without saying that all 15 of those areas are extremely important. But what we're looking for are the things that are going to rise to the top and be mentioned more frequently than anything else. So any questions or comments on the areas of expertise that we're proposing?
Ms. Workman? Julie, you're muted.
I see that. Oh, do they just check them off, or do they rank them 1 through 5?
They just check them off. Now in the online survey, it says choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, 4, and 5. So some people may assume it's an order of priority, but ultimately it is an aggregate of what are your top 6, all on the level same playing field.
Okay, great.
Great question.
Thank you.
Director Nathan.
So we talk a lot about equity in our district, and I don't know if the phrase inclusion of diverse populations really gets at what we want to ask about the areas of expertise in equity. I know that in some other surveys I've seen MSBA do, you've used diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have a long phrase, but it would be so much longer than all the other phrases, even though it reflects, I think, our work. Do you have any other recommendations of something else that might more emphasize equity?
Great question. One of the phrases we could certainly use is equity, leadership, challenges, and opportunities. That's longer, but not too long. Equity, leadership, challenges, and opportunities. We could use that in addition to inclusion of diverse populations. Sometimes what we find is folks get confused about the difference between equity and inclusion, so they choose both or. So I don't want to water down responses by having 2 that are too similar. But again, this is the board survey, and we want to include the right language that you feel reflects the intention of the survey.
Ms. Amundsen.
I'm not a huge fan of the words challenges and opportunities, but I do think that including equity in that phrase somewhere would be good. I don't have much of an improvement. Other suggestions for improvement?
Well, if we just said equity, diversity, and inclusion, does that get closer to what we're looking for?
Or do we want to use the word leadership in there? Equity, diversity, and inclusion leadership? I mean, there's a difference between knowing about it and having sort of led some work in it, I guess.
Does that work for people? Kathy just said with leadership at the end.
It already says areas of expertise, so would that be implying that they have expertise in leadership or just that they have experience in it?
And of course, how well we think the community will interpret it, right? Because it's really, we have to understand it, but our community also has to understand what it means. So maybe adding leadership makes it a little too fine of a point, whereas equity, diversity, and inclusion are more commonly referenced terms.
And then I think it's our responsibility to interpret the resume and interview questions to whether that is just exposure to or leadership.
Okay, but I'm seeing some heads nodding, so if we want to leave it or change it to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Good. Okay.
All right, equity, diversion, and inclusion is replacing inclusion of diverse populations. Correct?
Right.
All right. Thank you. All right. Anything else on that, or can we move on to 2 yes/no questions? We wanted to have a mix.
One more.
Yes, absolutely.
Under support services, will our community understand what that means? And does it mean special education and English learners, or should we be more specific?
That's up to you. Some districts like to spell out that it includes things such as that, or paras. All of those things can be included. We can put a parenthesis, IE, and then list some of those if that's helpful. Other districts say, no, they'll know what we mean when we say support services. So you tell me what you would like that to say.
I think that's a really good point. We're so used to the terminology that we don't always realize that might not be plain speak to everybody else.
Good, and I'm not hearing any objections to that, so I think having the parentheses after would be a good idea. Thank you.
Or how about support services / special education?
Well, I think the idea of just giving some examples rather than limiting it to that.
I'm wondering what other examples we're thinking of.
Well, like second language learners and
I think that's a good example. Other examples?
Students with learning disabilities?
well, yeah, that's special education.
Well, not necessarily. It's not. Well,
Depends on how you define it, but it's probably enough to give people an idea.
Okay, so we're okay with parentheses afterwards with a couple of examples, for instance.
With those 2 examples.
Okay, good. Okay.
And would special ed suffice, or do you want to say special education? Special ed is okay. And did you want, now is it ELL or ESL? What's the correct for language learners that you want in here? I don't want to not use the phrase you use in Rochester.
I believe it's English.
I think we should, English learners?
English language learners.
Actually,
And so we wouldn't want to abbreviate it because
okay.
we wouldn't know what ELL is then.
But English language learners? English language learners?
No, I think it's just English learners. I don't think it's
It's
English
EL.
language learners. It's
Yeah, okay. English learners.
Well, that might be confusing because I could see, like my grandparents think, kids go to English class and they're all learning English. So
That is one of the challenges when you start giving examples after these phrases, because those examples start to make it, down in the weeds, and then people want to think, oh, but what about and what about? So we do need to be careful that we're not pigeonholing too much into support services.
Right.
If though you think your stakeholders won't understand what support services mean to RPS, then we probably should list those examples.
Well, if we have in parentheses special e.g. special education, etc., or just e.g. special education, an example.
Okay.
So you don't want to include English learners at all, or? I mean, I think those are two big categories. And then there's a number of other areas.
Well, and the question is whether people will understand what English learners are, if that makes it more complicated. Director Garcia.
Sorry, I have more of an addition to something else, but I do agree with colleagues that we should be explicit about what we're asking for. I feel the same about the inclusion of diverse populations. If what it says is not what we mean, it needs to change. So, and my hand is up for something after this once we resolve whatever our support services are. But I agree with Director Nathan. Should be consistent with the language that we use, or even just listing the types of staff that we have that do those things. That might be helpful.
So
I'm checking our district website right now, and it does say English learner, and I don't see any alternative phrases that would be able to pick up from that webpage unless we were to add something like multilingual learners or something like that. That's the only other word here that I see that could key people into what we're talking about.
So if we want to be more specific, I think the two ideas we have on the table right now are to have in parentheses, e.g. special education, or e.g. special education, comma, English learners. Any feeling about one or the other?
I think it's fine the way you just said it, Jean.
The second example?
Second example? Okay, let's go with the second example. Thank you. And then Director Garcia, you had a question about the next thing or something.
Yes, maybe in addition of another one. We have a lot of students who have been very much interested in connecting with us over like climate and ecological commitment, so things that are, green and sustainability, et cetera. And I'm wondering if we can add something like that as well to our choices.
Would that be part of school facility oversight? Are we talking about sort of more green approaches to how the district operates?
Yeah, I know we got a lot of feedback too on the Harriet Bishop design about taking away green space, students, et cetera. So I feel like maybe again, if that needs to be clarified, because I look at school facility oversight, it's janitorial in nature, and or like us physically building a building rather than also be committed to sustainable options, like ecologically sustainable options.
And again, when you're evaluating what you want included in this, remember that this is for an interim position for someone who will be in the district for 1 year, and what priorities may that person need to address during the course of that year. And if that's an area you feel that they will be asked to address, then you should offer it as an option for folks to select from. If it is more of a long-term or perhaps something that the next superintendent will be really focusing on, then you could perhaps leave it on and do it with a survey for a long-term superintendent instead.
So, Director Garcia, do you have strong feelings about that one way or the other?
I mean, I feel like if we're going to do this, now too, wouldn't we want it to be kind of the template or basis for what we're eventually going to do, or no?
So you'd like to add something on there, something about like environmental / nature?
Yeah, and I mean, if Director Finn is right, and that other people might assume it under school facility oversight, I think another EG, or like in addition to letting us know that kind of what we're cluing in, I think that's been something that's very important to some of our students now, and also community members.
Thank you. Ms. Nathan?
Oh, I don't want to go on until we're satisfied with the language. Are we good? Is Barb good
Oh.
with clear on the recommendation for that one?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Ms. Amundson?
I'd rather see Director Garcia's suggestion be a separate line item rather than combined with school facility oversight, because I think there are a lot of other things with sustainability that don't overlap with school facility oversight. So I'd like to see it as a separate line.
So do we want to call that environmental issues or environmental concerns, or either Mr. Barlow or Director Garcia, do you have an idea about how you'd like to word that? Mr. Barlow, do you have?
Well, personally, the superintendent, currently our staff, cabinet members, Scott Sheridan has responsibility, not the superintendent. And I think we're trying to assign this responsibility. We're looking for an interim superintendent, not a director of facilities and operations. So I think, you know, it's the overarching skill set that an interim will have to manage the cabinet level positions, not to manage the programs. But that's my basic. I'm good with school facility oversight.
Okay, and let's kind of wrap this one up. Do we want another? No. Ms. McLaughlin, I don't have the answer. Thanks for weighing in.
I don't have the answer, but I'm wondering if another way to get at the same concept that Director Garcia may be talking about is I'd like to see something student focused. You know, and maybe that's it, is that the interim superintendent, you know, have some sort of student focus to bring the students in. I think that that's something that would be a highlight of an interim if we can find somebody that has that aspiration. You know, maybe student responsiveness or something like that.
Do you like student engagement, Karen? Since we're
I
looking
do.
for an area of expertise.
Yeah, I do.
All right, Ms. Amundson.
Would we be able to make that student and parent engagement, or are those two different things? Or student
We have
parent
like
engagement? We have community outreach.
But I do think, obviously, I do agree with Director McLaughlin. I think if, like, a community outreach, there could be a number of things that fall under that, but the focus on, you know, student voice, student engagement, I think would also fit.
Okay, so if we include student engagement there, is that going to work for everyone? An additional category, student engagement. Good. Okay.
Yes, and I would add, if we're going to do community outreach, we could always add community and parent caregiver outreach to that one, so that we're separating out the student, so that we're giving specific voice to the student piece, and we're giving specific voice to the community and parent caregiver piece.
Okay. Does that work for? And I
like
see.
that.
Still, I don't want to be. Mr. Barlow, do you have something else? Yes. No. Okay. Ms. Amundson.
We moved on from the environmental sustainability question without resolving it, I believe.
Well,
I just wanted to point out that if we think that that's the job of a cabinet member, then we probably shouldn't also have a number of other things on this list are also jobs of cabinet members. I do think that it's particularly relevant right now with building programs happening. I mean, we're building buildings. So I think environment and sustainability is relevant right now, and is key to our community, is important to our community. So
okay,
I go back advocating for a separate category for that.
all right, and I wonder if that's the kind of thing that we can absolutely focus on more in the long-term superintendent. I think what we came to was student engagement, someone who would absolutely engage with kids who are interested in the environment and in sustainability, that type of thing, but it would be broader than just environment. Does that work still now?
And I guess Director Marvin, because it was my idea, Chair Marvin, I was trying to broaden it to listen to the student voice in all types of things, not just in the environmental issue, but hoping that the students who reach out on the environmental issue would reach out to the interim superintendent on other things too.
Okay. So
I would recommend trying to keep this shorter as opposed to much longer, because keep in mind that this survey is meant to be a top of mind, your gut reaction response, and people who are taking this survey should not overthink it. We really truly want their gut response to their top 6 choices. And I don't know that continuing to wordsmith or dig deeper will do us much long-term good with the survey, because the more complicated we make it, sometimes the more difficult to interpret the results they are. And to Director Barlow's point, this is an interim position. So if that interim position, one of the priorities might be the sustainability or environment piece, then yes, absolutely, let's include it. And if not, the hard part about this, the hard part about the whole survey, when you're talking in areas of expertise for a superintendent, regardless if it's an interim or a long-term, there's about 150 areas of expertise that they need to be really good at. So narrowing them down is definitely a challenge. This is not unusual. The tricky part is let's focus on the big picture, the 1,000-foot view, and not necessarily boots on the ground type of thing. So I would, at this point, I really like the additions you've had: community and parent/caregiver outreach. I changed the inclusion to equity, diversity, and inclusion. I added student engagement, and I added to support services, e.g. special ed, English learners, etc. Is that okay? And I'm not capitalizing that special ed is both lowercase and English is uppercase and learners will be lowercase, unless that should be different.
Yeah.
I know it takes up more space, but I would encourage writing out education for special education. Just, I don't want to short circuit.
Okay, and that's why I asked about it, because every district is different about the particularities of the language they use, and semantics matter. So is everyone in agreement that it should say special education in those parentheses? Okay.
Okay. Ms. Nathan, is
Can I make
still up? Go ahead.
Yes. So can I make a suggestion that instead of community parent caregiver outreach, it's engagement, because that's the term we use in the district. And then I have one question on a different category about student learning models. We've used the phrase learning models a lot under COVID, but obviously we're talking about a broader perspective, hopefully beyond COVID. So what do you intend, or what do you think of when you say student learning models?
That's a question for the board, correct?
Yeah,
Not MSBA? That's what I thought.
Well,
I'm not going to answer
right.
that.
Well, I just don't know. I don't know if we don't know what it means. Do we know that the community will know what that means?
I was actually raising my hand to suggest taking that off. I'm not sure that it is very meaningful.
I would second that. Ms. Workman.
I would agree too, because I was looking at it and having some confusion in my head, and we're the ones who are supposed to be able to understand the language that we're using. So unless Chair Marvin would really like to have a half-hour debate on this, I'm fine taking it out.
I can tell you for sure Chair Marvin would not like that debate. Ms. Amundson.
What about just student learning? Because we don't have anything else on there that indicates a focus on academics, and that would be a concern to me.
Does that work for everyone?
That's good. I like that.
And I think, unless we have strong disagreement, I think we're ready to move on to the yes/no questions.
Student learning, remove the word models. Got it. Thank you very much. So in the survey, we always like to have a mix of, choose your top 6 to force some prioritization, as well as some yes, no, and then some open-ended qualitative questions. So these are the 2 questions we most typically use, and for a large district, I think in particular, they both are a good fit. Is everyone okay with the language in there as how we are asking the yes, no response? There's no maybe. We ask people here to choose one or the other, a yes or a no. And some people may leave it blank. I should mention that when this survey is conducted online or even in person, if they choose to leave an answer blank, that's totally okay. Their choice.
I know Ms. Nathan had a suggestion about that one.
Can get off mute. There we go. I was wondering if the community would understand what the word large district means, or if it's better to say a district our size or larger.
I had the same thought, so.
Ms. Workman? No? Okay. Yeah, we had that discussion briefly, just to make it clear, large means at least as large as Rochester, or Rochester size or larger. Any problems with that? Okay.
Could you say similar size? Could you just say similar size district?
Well, but I think we're very open to people who've had experience in really big districts too.
True. Okay.
Okay, got that one. Excellent.
So phrase that for me, Chair Marvin, if you would more. Experience as a superintendent or cabinet level administrator in
A district at least as large as Rochester.
I like the way
Okay.
Ms. Nathan phrased it better, our size or larger.
That's fine.
our size or larger. In a district our size or larger. We're good? Great.
Good.
Thank you. All right. Then we have personal characteristics. And again, I'll just say right up front, there's about 150 to 200 personal characteristics you may want in your superintendent. Some of these are the ones that bubble up most often. And so we wanted to suggest those for the Rochester search. Is there anyone who objects to any of these 15 or would like to add one or two? These are largely soft skills. And so soft skills are open to people's interpretation of what you mean by personable, what you mean by enthusiastic, and that's okay. It's not a hard skills question, it is a soft skills question.
I was impressed with the list. I think it's good. Anyone else?
Barb, do you ever have another?
No, but we certainly could add, and we'd be curious to see what we get. If you'd like me to add other in there, I certainly could do that. People who love adjectives are going to give us all kinds of wonderful words. It might be a great way for me to expand my repertoire of adjectives to describe superintendent's characteristics. So we could certainly do that.
Director Workman.
I'm not sure if maybe there are a number of these that would get to this point. I was going to say works well with others, plays nicely in the sandbox, or somebody can be an effective communicator, but to me that's one way. Like, I can communicate to you what I want you, but I want it, the whole idea of really listening and responding to what's being suggested or offered, sort of more of a teamwork kind of approach. But my words are not very good tonight, so.
Do you think collaborative gets to that, Julie?
I also, the word that comes saying that is agreeable, but I think like approachable and personable fit that.
Yeah. Yeah, we can leave it. I think this is me maybe getting into the weeds right now when we don't need to.
Also, one thing I should let you know is that as a board, you'll be receiving a link this week to a survey for the hiring criteria. We have been coming up with criteria that we feel would best fit the circumstances of a district your size that's looking for a one-year interim superintendent. So you'll be getting that link, and some of the things you're talking about right now, listening, things like that, are in the hiring criteria. And we're only going to give you about 15 to 20 of those and ask you as board members to individually select perhaps your top 6. And then those hiring criteria we'll discuss further at the planning meeting, and that's what would go in your vacancy brochure. So these are not hiring criteria. These are looking for prioritization from your stakeholders about what's important to your stakeholder groups. It's different than hiring criteria, which is something the board is going to work on this week. So I added an other to these personal characteristics. Are we good then with that addition? Thank you. That's a wonderful idea. I'm excited to see what we get with that.
Okay, Melissa, anything else?
Yeah, I was wondering about the addition of respectful or something along those lines, like treating people with respect. Just do any of the other categories already cover that? Does anyone else feel like that's an important quality?
I do.
Okay,
I do actually, particularly in an interim, that I think that if they don't have that quality, I think that they would not be very effective as an interim.
Okay, let's add respectful then. And then if there are no other suggestions there, I think we're ready to move on to the longer questions.
So for open-ended questions, we don't want to ask too many because not everyone's going to want to fill this out. Some people really want to expand on their thoughts that they've had, earlier they've talked about characteristics and background and expertise. So they want to expand further, but many people don't fill out these open-ended questions, and that's okay. The first question is always something about positive. What's positive in the district right now? Because we want people to enter into this with the right mindset. Focusing on the positive right away can do that. It's one of those softball questions. We also specifically asked about the Rochester School District. We're hoping that's the context they will answer in, because I know many people love their local schools, they love their neighborhood schools, their teachers, all of those things. But I think we want to get to the heart of what the district is doing well right now. So that's usually where we start with these questions. We get a lot of great responses, and it is something that really highlights all the great things that are happening. The second question is where we get into some challenges. Now, in this case, we're specifically asking about in the coming year. Sometimes with a long-term search, we ask instead about what challenges are on the horizon over the next 5 years. But in this case, we really want to know what over this 1 year are some challenges that the interim superintendent might need to be aware of. And then similarly, we'd like someone to be able to step in and hit the ground running. 12 months goes really, really fast. So if we can gather from stakeholders what some of the characteristics of the staff and students in the district are, as well as some of the characteristics of the entire district and the community, some of that foundational information could be really useful to your new interim superintendent when they start. And then the actual extra area for additional comments, that's one last chance for people to say what they're thinking. It's very, very open-ended. And there's some times where we get the cafeteria food is horrible, or you get really unusual comments in there. And that's good because people want to be heard. A big part of this survey is not only for you to have some data upon which to make decisions around the interview questions, for example. This survey also serves a purpose for people to feel heard. Am I not confining them to very specific questions only, but giving them the chance to say, well, what else is on your mind? People will feel heard. So those were our suggestions for the questions in this part of the survey as well. I wouldn't recommend any additional questions, but if you feel we need to change these, again, this is your survey and you will own this. And so I want to make sure it's reflecting what you're looking for.
My suggestion here, and this may be just me, but question number 3, I think the wording's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit confusing. And if it read instead, what is it important for the interim superintendent to know about Rochester Public School students and staff.
Okay. Yeah, that was funny. We talked about that today and we thought, well, to know about, well, then you can't end a sentence in a preposition. Or what are some things to be aware of? I can't end a sentence in a preposition there either. So I appreciate that, Chair Marvin. Some suggestions on rewording that would be most welcome.
And every once in a while,
Jane, could you repeat it? Could you repeat what you said?
I can, but sometimes we like to take a walk on the wild side and end sentences. And what is important for the interim superintendent to know about Rochester Public School students and staff? Director Garcia.
I would say mechanically, just keeping with the last, the kind of language we're using in the last two, would it not also make for number one and number two to end with, you know, for the interim superintendent? Because I think the first two, it's like kind of out of the blue asking them for their opinion about something going on in the district when we're asking, when what we want to know is what information should we be giving to the, you know, interim superintendent, what information we need to choose the right person. Does that make, so like what are some of the positive things in place in the Rochester school district today that the interim superintendent should know versus just leaving it the way that it is?
Okay, and you're suggesting that for which question?
Number 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So that it just flows better with the purpose of this survey.
I would agree with that. I think that's a really great observation to have those three questions consistently worded in the same way. Because it wasn't clear to me if we were expecting the interim superintendent to just know all this stuff off the bat, or if this is information that we need to be giving him or her.
And you don't necessarily need to give the results of this survey to the incoming interim superintendent. Some
Right.
districts choose to share it and some don't. More than anything, it's going to help, I believe, raise the level of awareness on the board of what's important to the stakeholders. And then you can craft your interview questions around it. So depending upon what things are very positive in the district right now, you may come up with a couple of questions surrounding those to ensure that your candidates can address and continue the momentum of those things that are very positive. So that the purpose again of this survey is to inform you as a board in making decisions relative to the search between now and when it's complete. And the second purpose is so your stakeholders feel heard and included in the process. So two primary areas. Whether you include or share the results with the interim superintendent when the time comes will be a choice that the district's going to make.
Okay, I'm hearing that there's an appetite for making sure that the syntax of the questions is sort of the same. So the theme is, what do we want people coming in to interview for the job to know about this district? What's working, and the challenges are, who the staff students are, who the community is. Is that right? So it's just, the questions are good, it's just sort of the wording. And the focus is on what message do we want to send to people coming in? Here's who we are, right? Okay, so Barb, if you got that and can kind of tweak that.
Sure. Yep, and the syntax is important. So if it's all right with the board, contextually, all four questions are appropriate. And then if it comes down to semantics, is it okay in the morning if I check with Chair Marvin to ensure that we have it correctly, knowing it's going to be translated into many other languages. I don't know what gets lost in translation or does not, but if I could finalize the questions with Chair Marvin, is that okay with the rest of the board? Okay, thank you.
Ms. Amos?
When you were talking about whether or not the results are to the new interim superintendent, that makes me wonder, how are we receiving these results and will they be available to the public?
We will summarize the results for you. All of the quantifiable information is relatively easy because the survey tool condenses and quantifies all of that information. Depending upon the number of responses, we will be able to summarize for you the trends that are emerging from people's open-ended responses in each of these 5 areas, the 4 questions as well as the comments. You have access, if you are interested, in the full realm of information. I'll tell you though, if you have more than 300 or 400 people respond, it's a lot of data to read through, and you are welcome to it. The data will belong to the board. Typically, the survey summary that we provide to the board is published, and that is something that is available to the public to review. If the board is interested, you have access to the actual survey results. Whether or not there's a data request to see the full results is up to you. But there could be thousands and thousands and thousands of comments. And I know you've done surveys before. Director Barlow mentioned that. So perhaps you have a system in place already for the compilation and availability of the information from the surveys. And if you do have that precedent set, then I would say I just recommend you follow the precedent of your previous surveys.
This works.
Do you ever put on surveys anything to make it very clear to the public that we are simply seeking information, they are not voting?
There's a summary sheet we provide to the district. The language in there talks about how the surveys are, responses are anonymous, and MSBA will be summarizing the results for the board. We haven't explicitly said we're information gathering. This is not a voting process. I can certainly put a word like that in there if you'd like. That language usually accompanies the email blast or the letter home to parents or the press release to the papers. So every district's communications department will wordsmith that press release or the email communications to best fit the district.
Okay, I don't care where it's communicated, just that it is communicated.
Okay.
All right, I think we're doing pretty well here. And then the last question is any additional comments, and I think that's seems to me we're in agreement about this. We'll get the final iteration of this tomorrow morning, and we should be good to go. Then we have about 10 minutes. We want to take a quick look at the timeline. I'm wondering if we could best use that time, Barb. If you would go over and just sort of explain as quickly as you can what each of these steps involve, and then as a board, working within your schedule, we could do some sort of a document where we could figure out when the meetings might be that would fit both the end date that we come up with as well as individuals' schedules.
Okay, sounds good. I put together the timeline first that has the May 3rd application deadline. That's a fairly condensed search, and when I completed it, I went back and I just said, well, maybe I could shave a week off here, and so I tried to condense it even further if that's of interest to the board. Obviously tonight we have the pre-planning meeting where we're just reviewing the survey and the search timeline. I would like to know when the planning meeting might be able to occur. So however you're going to actually choose on that, I've suggested next Tuesday or Wednesday, simply because we need to get the ball rolling fairly quickly. And again, these are proposed dates. I'm proposing we open the stakeholder survey, for example, next Friday. That is expecting that we have all of the translation done and back to us, and we've been able to input it in our survey tool and get the links to the district. So that's a fairly aggressive timeline for us to be able to do that. But we can turn it around as quickly as you might need. So I'm proposing that if we are able to meet next week for the planning meeting, which is where you take a much deeper look at the vacancy brochure, we go through the hiring criteria, which the board is going to be having a survey sent to you this week to take as individuals, and then leave that survey open for about 2.5 weeks. That's typical. There's always a huge rush of response right away. Then there's a lull, and then we get a reminder out that it's, survey closes Friday or something like that. And there's another rush at the conclusion of that. So in this timeline, we're suggesting about 2.5 weeks. We would also post this position next Friday, a week from Friday. That means that there's a lot of work to be done between now and then, which is why we're suggesting the planning meeting be next Tuesday or Wednesday. If that's too aggressive, again, these are just suggestions. We can change that if the board's interested. If we do post it on April 2nd and then close it on May 3rd, that's about a 4.5 week window for applicants to fill out the application process. That should be plenty of time. It's gotten to be late enough in the search season that people who are serious about these opportunities are ready to go. And that's why I thought we could potentially even shorten up the application window by a week to finish your search at the end of April, at the middle of May instead of the end of May. But on this timeline, planning meeting, stakeholder survey, we have the opening posted on all of the websites. We get our communications. We are recruiting already, and I have to tell you, there's a lot of interest in this position. I've had many conversations with folks who have questions, and at this point, we don't have answers because the board has some decisions to make moving forward, the biggest of which is the hiring criteria and the brochure. But I just want to let you know that there is definitely interest in the interim position for the Rochester Public Schools. The April 27th, 29th, or May 3rd is a suggested date for interview training. That usually takes about 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours. I'm gathering from the discussion earlier on the survey that may run longer than that, since you seem to have a great deal of interest in semantics. And we want to finalize, or at least introduce and discuss, the interview questions for your interview itself. So on top of interview training, which is what can you do, what can't you do, how should you do it, how do you debate in public, what are the data privacy laws that are going to govern your discussions, we might want to book up to 3 hours for that one potentially. Now on
this is Karen. I don't want.
Yep. I got you're muted again, Karen. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Is there a document that you're looking at that I should have?
Does it look like that?
I don't have anything, so.
It came at 2:13 p.m. today.
Let me look back.
Okay. I'm sorry, Karen. I should have asked that before I started talking. I was just going off the timeline that was emailed out, so my apologies.
Karen, it's from Tracy Christensen.
That's what I'm missing. Got it.
So we're looking at the one that says draft, not draft 2. And the draft suggests a closing date of May 3rd. One of the things I would ask is that, and sometimes we can finalize all of these dates at the planning meeting. Really, if that one date could be set by some sort of poll or however you're planning on doing that. The other dates we can talk through because there's pros and cons to how close we schedule some of these meetings to others. For example, April 21st, if we close the survey April 21st, April 27th is only 6 days later. That's a very, very tight turnaround for MSBA, especially with multiple language surveys, to get those translated with your staff, get back to us so we can write that summary report. So if we're going to have this survey open till the 21st, it would be our preference that the interview training and review of the stakeholder report and all of those things might happen on May 3rd. So there are some pros and cons. It's almost like a domino effect. When one date is picked, it can affect the next day and the next date and the next date. If the deadline is May 3rd, MSBA starts reviewing those immediately on the 4th, and we will go through and ensure that every application that's been submitted is complete. You will, as a board, receive all of those applications, and we'll send those to you the next day on May 5th. We need 1 day to ensure that we're not going to send you any incomplete applications, but when we have actually confirmed that all of those are complete, the documents that are required are in there, we will forward those to you through a secure link. This is done electronically, and you will be able to begin reviewing those on May 5th. The one thing we always have to be careful of, and I know you're used to the issues around confidentiality, is that as board members, you will have access to that secure link. You cannot be reviewing these applications in any sort of public place where someone might see what you're looking at. A resume, a name, anything like that, you're violating data practices law if you do that. So when you're looking at them electronically, you should not download them, print them, screenshot them, or be looking at this information in a place where someone could look over your shoulder and see your screen. So it's very important, data privacy at this point, while you're reviewing applications. Then you, yes.
Excuse me, Ms. Workman.
Yes. My question is on the length of time that the survey is held open. Would it be helpful if we went to a slightly shorter period of time? I see that April 2nd is on a Friday. If we closed the survey at midnight on Sunday the 18th, would that help give you a little bit more wiggle room in going through all of it?
Certainly. Certainly. And it also, again, depends upon who we're working with in your district to translate the results. And since I'm not sure who those folks are and what their capacity is, we need those turned around within a day or two of the survey closing. But yes, it can absolutely be adjusted. And in fact, the second timeline in here, I have the survey being open for 12 days and closing on April 14th. So if you want to back things up, you have all kinds of room to do that. It's knowing your stakeholders and knowing if they're just going to fill it out right away. Maybe it only needs to be open for a week. You know, typically with a long-term superintendent search, we'd recommend it's open for 3 or 4 weeks. But again, in this case, people might be ready to provide input and just dive in and get it done.
Okay, and
I guess my feeling is that usually if people see that, oh my gosh, I have a month to answer this, they might not come back to it, or you would get everything all at once at the very end, like a bunch of students turning in their homework. But if they know they have a shorter period of time, then they might be more likely to do it right away so they don't overrun the deadline.
Yep.
But
two things
You've
I
done
don't
this
know.
before.
my fellow board members have to think.
Two things I think we're looking
I don't
at.
know what my fellow board members think about that, but
So if we can get through the timeline, if Barb can just quickly walk us through the timeline, and then if we can set a date for the planning meeting, I think the kinds of issues you're raising, Julia, are important ones. It seems to me that at the planning meeting, then we can go step by step through the deadline and determine if we want to move dates then. But let's focus now on just understanding what the process involves and then seeing if we can set a planning meeting date. It looks like 2 more questions, Ms. McLaughlin and then Ms. Nathan.
I was just going to raise the question that I believe that the April 2nd might be the last day of spring break. So I don't know if we want to drop a survey during spring break or not. We might lose people by having the first day in a day that people perhaps might be focusing on other things.
And Ms. Nathan, did you have a question or not anymore? No? Okay.
So once you receive all of those applications electronically, you will have at least 5 days to review them, depending upon when you'd like to set the meeting to determine your finalists. And on this timeline, I'm suggesting between May 11th and 14th. At this meeting is where you will be discussing the applications and choosing who you would like to bring in for the interviews. We will, as MSBA, recommend to you 4 people that we feel best fit your hiring criteria and have the skills and experience to best fulfill your requirements as interim superintendent. Just because those are the 4 that we will recommend doesn't mean that you have to select those 4. It's just our vetting process. We've done quite a bit of diving into their backgrounds from when we have the survey, or excuse me, the applications on May 4th, and until we actually make those recommendations, we've done some much deeper dives into their backgrounds and experience and references. So we'll come to you with 4 that we feel you could interview that would be excellent candidates. You could choose to accept those 4, replace some here and there, or choose an entirely different 4 to interview. That will be up to the board. But during that entire conversation, you're only referring to these candidates by A, B, C, or X, Y, Z. No names. Data privacy, extremely important. Once you have identified who to interview and you've made a motion to interview candidates A, B, and D, once that passes, we'll read the names out loud. The names of your finalists will be made public that evening. Everyone else who applied for the position, their names remain forever confidential. So anyone whose resume and application you looked at, you cannot share that publicly forever and ever. So data practices is extraordinarily important when you're talking about superintendent candidates. But once you have had that meeting to determine your finalists, and again, we'll make our recommendations, then those names are public, and then you interview those 4 folks. And so there are some suggested dates here to interview. And then you, depending upon your negotiations process in your district, you could have an individual designated by the board to stay within the parameters the board has given them, and they can begin negotiations with that person that you have selected as your sole finalist immediately after their interview. Some folks bring in other administrators into the process, someone in HR, sometimes legal counsel are involved in those, but you could designate one person, very often it's the board chair, to negotiate on your behalf. If, though, you choose to have the full board negotiate or a subcommittee to negotiate, you just want to keep in mind that the open meeting law is going to apply to those negotiation sessions. If it's one board member, you do not need to have the open meeting law where it's posted 3 days in advance and so on and so forth. So the negotiations process is something you'll want to think through and decide in advance as well. And then you sign the contract at one of your regular meetings, or if you need to call a special meeting to do so, you can do that as well. And then the second timeline is really just 1 week shorter. I shortened up the time for the survey, and I shortened up the time for the application window from 4.5 to about 3.5 weeks. And that should be enough time as well. To Director Workman's point, when people are interested in the job, they're not going to put it off. And so I don't think you need to have a long, drawn out application window for folks that are looking at this position.
Ms. Nathan?
Barb, usually how long does it take to complete the negotiation process? Is it a few days? Should we allow a week? How does that usually work?
Boy, that's the $1 million question. We have seen it sometimes completed within 24 hours. If, however, it's a complex situation and the contract is complicated, it can take at least a week. Some districts have the contract prepared in advance that the board is proposing to send to a candidate. So sometimes when a candidate is notified that they are the sole finalist, the board has a contract ready to send to them for them to react to and make a counter offer. Again, it just depends on your internal resources and how proactive you've been able to be with the contract specs in order to present those to a candidate for their reaction and their negotiation back to you. I hate to give you an it depends answer, but it really depends.
But it's reasonable to think that by May 25th we have a study session scheduled, and that's the last Tuesday. Is it realistic to assume we could vote to approve a contract by that last Tuesday in May? Is that according to this May time frame?
Yep. If you have conducted the interviews between May 17th and 20th, I would think 5 days would be plenty of time. The sole finalist wants your job. They would not have gone to all the work to submit their application, have the background check. We'll do a background check on all of them, only to turn you down. So negotiations, everyone wants it to work, and I would think 5 days should be plenty of time for that.
Okay, I'm sorry, Dr. Marvin, one more question. Should we be asking our legal counsel to draft a contract template? Do you have a suggestion as to where we start with the contract? Do we start with our previous superintendent contract? How does that work?
Some districts start with the current superintendent's contract. We use at MSBA the MSBA-MASA model contract that the two organizations developed together. I don't know if your current contract is based on that model contract. Also, though, MSBA does have a model interim superintendent contract, which you could use as a starting point. Generally speaking, interim superintendent contracts are simpler. There's just less involved. Depending upon your candidate, they may or may not need the benefits that a more long-term superintendent is looking for. So we do have an interim superintendent contract you could start with. You could dovetail it with your current contract. It's a great idea to involve your legal counsel earlier rather than later in case these things do get really complex. So again, it's just what you have typically followed as far as protocol in your district with superintendent contracts.
Barb, I think you've done an excellent job of taking us through the steps very quickly. Clearly, you've done this before, so thank you for that. It looks to me it is now 7 minutes after the end of what was supposed to be the end of our meeting. I am wondering if two proposed dates for a planning meeting, both are next week, so this is short notice, either next Tuesday or next Wednesday. And Melissa, question before we have this discussion about if we can get a meeting planned.
And I'm on the timeline as well, so you keep saying what you were saying.
Okay, thank you. So are there those here who you would not be available to either Tuesday or Wednesday next week?
Depends on the time.
All right, so, and Jess, I know you got a
Tuesdays are easiest, but it would again depend on the time.
All right. Is there anybody here who could not meet next Tuesday? Oh my gosh, this is like a gift. Okay. Well, how about this then? If we plan on Tuesday, I'll send out some sort of thing asking about time, and I think we want to be really respectful of people whose schedules really are busy with work and with other obligations. Barb, how long do you anticipate that meeting would last?
Typically, it's about 2 hours, and it depends on how many questions the board has. We've done a preliminary run through on the timeline. Sometimes the timeline can take us a half an hour, but if you've had a chance to take a look at your calendars, you know what dates in yellow you're just not available. We could get through the timeline more quickly than we typically do. I will have hopefully a draft vacancy brochure for you to look at. I would allot 2 hours. We've sometimes done it in an hour and a half, and I had one board go 2.5 hours. It just depends upon your comfort level with saying, yep, this is what we're doing. This is our plan. This is our timeline. This is our brochure. This is the survey. Let's go. And if your comfort level with that is high, I'd say we're done in 2 hours.
Okay, good. How about then, Barb, if you're okay, after this meeting ends, and I know, Melissa, you still have a question, if you could stand for one more minute and I'll find out what your availability is time-wise, and then send out a memo to board members to find out what 2-hour period would work the best then. Melissa, thank you for waiting.
So just between the two timeline schedules, I'm more in favor of an aggressive schedule and keeping application windows and survey windows short for the purpose of giving us leeway in case any of those other pieces end up getting lengthened for any reason, so that we're not so rushed. Regarding the next Tuesday meeting, is it possible that we could get an early draft, send in some thoughts, and if they aren't opposing thoughts, that you'd be able to incorporate for a more final draft with the purpose of maybe shortening our meeting a little bit?
I have sent a document to the district, to Heather, I believe. Is she your Executive Director of Communications? Okay, there is a document that I sent out, last week, and she will have that back to me tomorrow afternoon. That will include all the demographic information about the district, the finances of the district. I did ask for points of pride in the district. What are the things that you are most proud of, the things that make you different, what makes this opportunity special? That is an area where if board members could send me your thoughts, I could weave those in as well. So points of pride in the district and points of pride or what's wonderful about living in the Rochester community. Getting those in advance, if I could have those before the weekend, would be useful. I don't know that I'll be able to get a draft brochure to you. Well, I know I won't be able to get it to you before the weekend, but I will get that to you. If we're meeting Tuesday, I will get it to you by Monday afternoon. So you'll have 24 hours to look at it. And then if it's not quite right and we're not able to settle on the language in the brochure on Tuesday, we have until Friday that we're hoping to potentially post this opening. Keeping in mind that the brochure will be really good. It will probably not be perfect. Sometimes perfection slows down the process. And with the timeline that you're looking at, we're going to need to get this thing out there. So your thoughts in advance would be great. Yes. And then on Tuesday, if we don't spend too long wordsmithing the details, that'd be great. I will get you that survey link. Let's see, tomorrow's Tuesday. I'll get you the survey link by Wednesday morning for you to, as board members, individually select your top hiring criteria. Again, we have about 15 to 20 of them listed. They are all very important, but we're going to ask each of you as individuals to select probably your top 6. That compilation of results, I would appreciate having back perhaps by Friday morning, give you 48 hours to take that survey. And then I can start weaving in those hiring criteria to the brochure as well. Hiring criteria, leadership profile, terms used interchangeably, but what are you looking for in a superintendent? So that survey link will be out by Wednesday morning to all of you. And if you could, within the 48 hours, fill it out and get it back to me. It won't take you more than 5 minutes. Again, go with your gut reaction. Don't overthink it. And we'll just see where the tendency of the board lies as far as what the priorities are for your hiring criteria.
Thank you. Director Garcia.
I just had a question about who will be sending us the links for that. Are they coming from you?
I'm sorry, you were shorting out. I heard sending us the links for...
Yes, who specifically is sending us the links for the applications?
The links for the applications. To see the applications?
Yeah.
When the time comes, so once the application window has closed and you want to be able to look at who's applied, okay, that will be coming through probably Tracy. Will be your point person to share that with the board members. I'll always copy Chair Marvin on any emails to Tracy, and she's going to disseminate it to the right people. The board emails will go through her, and you'll get all of those things, including the link and very specific instructions to get into the database to see the applications. Other communications, when I send it to Tracy, she may forward it on to someone else, such as Heather. John, if there's things I need throughout the search, she knows who's who in the district and said she'd be able to get what we need from an internal coordination standpoint. So she's my single point person at this time, and I'll always copy Chair Marvin on those emails.
Okay, perfect. And I'll follow up with her. We have another Jessica Garcia in the district, and this poor woman is getting a lot of my emails. And so obviously with data privacy, I just want to make sure that this one is coming directly to me.
Thank you for being very conscious of that. And yes, just ensure with Tracy that it's going to you and you only.
Okay, Director Workman, quick question.
Yeah, I guess I had some of the same concerns that Director Garcia had. Is there any reason why this information can't be just sent directly to the board? Does it have to go through somebody else?
Directly from MSBA to the board and board only? Is that what you're asking? Mm-hmm. We tend not to do that only because of the temptation some board members have to reply all. Now, I have seen on your communications from Chair Marvin that it's always, this is a one-way communication, do not reply all. So you probably have developed much better habits than many of the boards we work with. So we have tried to not email the entire board at once because of the tendency for people to start doing this and commenting and building. But in this case, if that would be easier, what
we've done with some of our communications is we blind copy everybody. That way, it's impossible to do a reply all.
Yep.
So just in terms of the data privacy and just so that there isn't even an appearance that there's a slip up. Okay. And I'm not at all maligning any of our district people, please understand that, but just to make sure, double sure that it's only going to the board and doesn't have the opportunity to go anywhere else. And if you blind copy all of us, then you can avoid that problem.
That's a great idea. So what we'll do in this case is for communications like the survey link and the board packets and things like that that I need your feedback on for these meetings in yellow, I can send those to Tracy to disseminate to the board. For the applications, directly from me, the only person MSBA, or it might be from Shelby. Shelby's our strategic governance administrative assistant. She's the database guru around here. It may come from Shelby, but directly to all 7 members of the board, I'll be CC'd. How's that plan? If that's how it will work best for your board, we are more than happy to do it that way. Okay, thank you very much. We'll do that.
We can confirm that at our planning meeting. So, Barb, if you can stand for 1 minute after we conclude the meeting, and Jess, if you could stand for 1 minute as well. I have a specific question for you. Any other questions? Because otherwise, I think, no other questions. It is 6:47 and this meeting is adjourned.